actually do worry about the well-being of like our employees sometimes, making sure we're not putting them under too much pressure.
Not being sarcastic, I like people.
It's okay to disagree. Like, let's disagree about technical stuff.
All the large companies in tech have their own sort of unique dev culture.
Us open source people infecting Microsoft with our disease. Buy or build is the first option. So with Microsoft, so the initial preference is to go build it yourself. This code runs on 1 billion machines. You're telling me it's not good enough?
Hi, I'm Paul Bigger, founder of Circle CI.
I'm Edith Harba, CEO and co-founder at LaunchDarkly.
And you're listening to Be Continuous, a podcast about continuous delivery and software development.
You can get in touch with us anytime at our Twitter handle @ContinuousCast.
The show is brought to you by Heavybit. To learn more, visit heavybit.com. And while you're there, check out their library, home to great educational talks from other developer company founders and industry leaders.
So what do you like least about open source?
As somebody who has to help teams become open from Microsoft and learn how to work in an open source community, sometimes people aren't always very friendly, and it takes a lot of mental energy to be nice and be professional and be polite and suck it up, and there's a reason why we can't have nice things on the internet and why you never read the YouTube comments, and sometimes you just have to go with it. And I actually do worry about the well-being of like our employees sometimes, making sure we're not putting them under too much pressure.
Yeah, and it was just to piggyback, I think that's probably the thing I would say too, but thinking about the morale of engineers, especially at Microsoft, who've never really been out in the open and been transparent about the code that they write and stuff. So too, yeah.
Yeah, I read this great tweet from Solomon Hykes, the co-founder of Docker, and he said he wanted to restart an open source without his own name. But now would be a great time. We're recording from the floor of Microsoft Build, Microsoft's biggest developer conference. And I'd love for you two to introduce yourselves.
Sure. So hi, my name's Martin Woodward. I work on the Visual Studio Team Services team over there, working with a bunch of communities. Before that, I was the executive director of the .NET Foundation. And then before that, I helped introduce Git into Microsoft. And then I was a company that did Java tools and things like that that got acquired, where I used to work with Ed as an MVP.
Yeah, we've been together 12 years now.
I know.
Wow.
Since the beginning of TFS. So we went through all those years. But I'm Ed Blankenship. I'm now the product manager for our DevOps family of products and services. So that includes Visual Studio Team Services and TFS and Application Insights and Hockey Apps. So, yeah.
So I'm interested in this thing that you said, because the idea that maybe people are a little unpleasant in the open source community and the internet in general, that's an idea I've never actually come across before.
So
first time hearing this.
Yeah.
Are you being sarcastic, Paul?
Okay.
Oh, all right.
All right, is that too subtle? I'm sorry.
The favorite part of my job as executive director is I got to work with the coolest people. Mm-hmm. Like there's so many people out there who are just awesome. Like Shifky Brendan Foster, he works at GitHub, and Brad Wilson and Oren Novotny, and just these awesome people in the community who are just amazing fountains of energy and creativity. And I been in startups before, had a real job before I came to Microsoft. And you always build this list of the people you want to go steal when you do your next startup. You want to, these are the people I'm going to go try and get to work for me sometime if I can. And I get to work with all those people, and I don't, we don't pay them, we don't pay each other. I was just there helping them be better at doing it. So that side's awesome, and you've got to hang on to that side. And you get people turning up with amazing gifts of code and amazing detailed bugs and things like that, and it's all awesome. And then you get the odd people who like to troll, you get the odd people who like to be snarky on comments, and they just kind of forget that there's people behind those things. Mm-hmm. And if we could keep the conversation about it's okay to disagree. Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's disagree about technical stuff.
Well, it's funny because I see that there's sort of two extremes. Maybe extremes isn't the right word. Maybe two camps of people, right? One camp, and Nadia, who was on our podcast last year sometime, another one in this camp of let's be nice to each other on the internet. We're a big community. We're people. Let's all be nice. And then there's the other camp which has some very famous people in it. And I'm thinking Linus Torvalds, Eric Raymond, for example, who are who gives a shit about people's feelings? Yeah. Code is the only thing that counts. And as a member of the former group, it's
The
very
feelings count.
the feelings count.
And just to check, you're not being sarcastic right now.
Yeah. not being sarcastic. I like people. It's kind of hard to explain to someone why they should care about the feelings of other people. Like,
And I also wonder sometimes, like some of the stuff that we see, I wonder if it's like because we're Microsoft employees.
Yeah,
and
we've got a lot of history, and and because you represent an entity that's kind of, you are
historically evil.
Yeah, but you're the face of it. You know what I mean? And so people think, well, you work there, you suck it up, and we do have to, but it does take toll on our staff, so we have to help them. But you were saying about like Linus, and he can be sweary at times. There's a famous commit over a pull request on libgit 2, which is a project I committed to, and I had to help get libgit 2 to be able to be shipping a Microsoft product. And this was actually the first time we'd ever shipped a GPL v2 type license product inside any Microsoft product.
Right.
And so there was a few nervous things about it. And there's these things I had to do, and I'm always trying to like balance requirements from the lawyers and different people, and actually what I'm going to get laughed out of court for.
It's full GPL. It's not LGPL.
Well, no, it's actually more liberal than GPL because libgit 2 is GPL v2 with a linking exception, which for us license wonks means you're allowed to link to it, whereas LGPL is certain. Anyway, so there was a bunch of I'll swerve away from that topic.
Well, no. I think it was just so funny, like how much we were trying to go under the table, like as much as possible, like not be seen at Microsoft, and still try to do it.
Yeah, so
like
we're trying to do the right thing. Well, we weren't. Yeah, we were very open with the actual community themselves.
Right.
But we hadn't announced that we were going to ship Git in a Microsoft product, but we were contributing to the projects we needed to contribute in. So with libgit 2, because we were going to actually ship the source code with the binary, because that's part of the license, we wanted to make sure we did that. We have a rule inside Microsoft of making sure we don't ship swear words in products.
That's not true of Paul's podcast.
Yeah, it's a complete legit to swear as much as you like on this podcast.
Okay, perfect.
Totally fine.
So definitely one of my early pull requests into libgit 2 was to remove the Linus's sweariness from the comments. Now, so and this is an interesting skill you've got to teach developers inside the team, is how to get a pull request merged. Because it's no good just coming along and going, I work for Microsoft. I'd like to... Are we allowed to swear, by the way? I like to remove some swear words from this, and they're just going to laugh you out. I was like, how am I going to get this pull request to get accepted? And the obvious way to do it is to turn it into a joke. So I sent the submission in, and it was basically removing expletives and all that sort of stuff from the code and tidying up the code because it had to pass our internal quality checks. That was the pull request that it came in. But I was trying to think, how do I make this into a joke? So I made the branch name was fuckety fuck. And so the first comment was, I love fuckety fuck has now been embedded into the libgit 2 history, which doesn't ship with the product, you see.
Good job.
So we like that, and we all laugh about that still. It's in libgit 2. You can find anyone can find the pull request. It's great.
This could have backfired horribly. I'm imagining like they put it right into the change log. And it's like the new fuckety fuck release.
From Microsoft.
Well, and I think that was a really interesting thing, though. So Martin said, like, hey, we hadn't actually announced that we were going to have, distributed version control, if anything else, Git inside of our products. And for the whole year, right before, there was like open commits happening. And I've always wondered, like, what other like big news is happening just at Git commit history, like all across.
Now with that particular one, we'd actually gone out and so back in then, so we basically I was on an airplane and I was traveling over to Seattle and I was reading The Innovator's Dilemma. And it's a book where everyone's seen the title of and everyone thinks they know what it means from reading the title, but there's lots of people that haven't actually read it. And if you actually read it, it's really, really good.
I love that book.
Extremely appropriate for modern Microsoft.
Every manager in Microsoft should be forced to read it every year.
Exactly.
Oh, wow.
It's that important because it helps how to identify disruptive technologies and then also business, tactics of how to organize a business to do it. We did it wrong, but it still worked, which I'm always amazed about. So I was reading this book and I was thinking, this is how to identify a disruptive technology. And I'd also been kind of mulling in my head that like distributed version control and centralized version control, like two different. And I was like, oh my God, distributed version control is disruptive technology to us as a tech.
What year is this?
This is 2009, I want to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2009, November 2009 it was, and I flew over. I was thinking, wow, it's disruptive technology. And I was like, because it had a completely different cost model, because all the processing is done on the client,
Right.
it's really cheap to host.
Yes.
And so like, in terms of
See where we're going?
in terms of managing the cogs of a cloud service.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And then we're used to using centralized version control systems, which are really hard to scale because you've got when you've got a load of Microsoft, 65,000 developers hacking on that thing all day, your servers have to be really beefy. And so it's a really interesting problem space. And then it's like, disruptive technology, what do we do with it? And so you have to identify it and then how we're going to adopt. And then we had to make the decision. Again, 2009. So we had the three options on the table were we need distributed version control. So we're Microsoft. 3 options now. One, buy or build is the first option.
Yeah,
so we're
yeah,
Microsoft, so the initial preference is to go build it yourself. We're
of course,
smarter than everybody else in the world, so that'll work out fine.
Yeah.
The next option.
It worked out really well with the Team Foundation server or whatever.
TFVC, Team Foundation Version Control,
There we
which
go.
is still in the product. But that's what we wanted to do was add a distributed version control to it. And I was talking to one of the engineers, and he was like, "Yeah, what we'll do is we'll ship a version of SQL Lite onto everybody." I'm like, "Oh no, shoot me now." So there was that, or we could have worked with the Mercurial community and added Mercurial into the product.
Yeah.
Or we could look at Git. And then so we sat down and we had a look at that. And basically, there was lots of different things that weighed into it. One was we were seeing that Git was being used more and more in actual continuous delivery cycles as the channel by which you transfer changes, which was a fascinating thing. And once you dig into Git, you realize that the way it transfers the network protocol is the file protocol. It's basically the repository moving across disk. It's very, very minimalist. It's great classic. I love Linus. It's great classic Linus architecture because it's simple and yet works.
Yeah.
It's very immutable.
Yes.
Have you seen that talk where he announced Git at Google?
No.
It is an amazing talk. You could look it up on YouTube, and it's basically him himself announcing Git and the Google engineers just shouting him down. like them being like, "This will never work. This is idiotic. How do you sync changes?"
There's so many ways in Git that, like, as a source control wonk, that wrong. Like, it makes guesses about things. Like, you don't make guesses with version control. You know precisely what happens. And it's just like heuristics, but they're always right. Even like using, SHA for hashing and things like that. And it's like, what if you have a hash collision? It never happens. So,
Yeah, it's a brilliant video just because it showed how nobody understood it at the time.
Yeah. But
interestingly, I have a backstory of Git. It's
a backstory for my backstory?
A backstory for your backstory. And I have no idea if this backstory is true or not, and I don't want to inquire because if you get too close to the truth, you might not be able to tell the story again.
Is it like looking at the sun?
Yeah, so Git was apparently based on monotone. And monotone was this thing that was written by Graydon Hoare, who's the guy who wrote Rust. And he had been writing it, and it was slow for reasons I don't remember. And Linus had looked at it, and it's like, monotone is the thing I want to hack on, sent Graydon an email, and Graydon replied, would love to help, but I'm in Greece and have no internet for several weeks. And he came back, and then Git was written. And so monotone is now dead, and Git has taken over, and there is no credit for Graydon as far as I can tell.
It comes down to him as well, in terms of Linus, like creating it over a weekend and all these sorts of things. That the initial things did begin very early, but then very quickly people like Junio came on and started contributing in, and then Pef, who's in the community as well. People very, very quickly piled onto that central community and then build up. But anyway, it was an interesting question when we were doing it. Which one do we pick? And the Git was winning in those areas, but then everyone would say, but Mercurial works better on Windows. Do you think Mercurial works better on Windows and Mercurial is more user-friendly? And it is. Both true.
Yeah.
At the time, anyway, especially on the works well on Windows. And then so I was like, that's interesting. And then I went to a couple of different conferences, and I thought, right, I'm going to go to every session I can go to about Git or Mercurial. And this was like an Eclipse Con or something, because I was in the Eclipse community. And this was like the Eclipse Con, and there was sort of, 90 bajillion Git sessions and 4 Mercurial sessions. I'm like, And then the final one was, I was just sat there and I was thinking, so the reason we would pick Mercurial is because, it works better than Git on Windows. I work for Microsoft. Surely we can fix that part. And then let's just have Git. And then it'd be better. And the reason for backing Git was because it wasn't just, it was better for the whole community, but it'd also make sure it was pretty looking like Git was going to win. And then if Git was going to win, but it didn't run well on Windows, then the whole Windows developer community would get left behind in this, this little sort of
Galapagos
favela
Island.
So again, it was to make sure that the Windows developers weren't left behind in their own little ghetto. Not Mercure is awesome. Don't come after me. Yeah. How do you know someone's a Mercurial user? Don't worry, they'll tell you. Yeah.
So I worked at Mozilla at the time that decision was being made, like Mercurial Git. And the thing that I think that everyone missed, like people made the decision on technical merits, right?
Yes.
And exactly like you're saying, works better on Windows, which was a consideration for us, and more user friendly. And the thing that I think that they missed out is that is not how developer communities work. Developer communities make decisions on fashion. Right, they're extremely fashion conscious. The thing that looks cool is the thing that's going to win, and technical merits matter basically fuck all.
Huh.
Yeah.
So it's also you get to there's a curve, isn't there, as well? You get past this curve where it just starts to snowball, and then you've gone.
Yeah.
And then the one of the clinches for us as well was we were looking at Xcode, and Xcode used to have a pluggable SCM model because SCM was always very source control. Sorry, was always very sticky. And then Xcode used to have a pluggable model for source control providers. And then with the new Xcode, and I'm so, I think it was like Xcode 3, Xcode 4, or whatever, I can't remember now, it's that long ago. But with the new version of Xcode, it was no longer pluggable. And then we were like, And the only options were Git and SVN. And we went, So we're going to have to build some kind of Git translation. If we built our own, we'd have to build Git translation. Let's just build Git.
Yeah.
So that's what we did. And then we had to work with the open source community. We had to, because if we're making that much of a strategic bet on an open source product, it's no good just adopting Git. You have to contribute because code talks.
Right.
Code does talk for open source.
It does, yeah.
It talks cheap. Unless you come with solutions, it's no good. So we had to get there and provide stuff.
Yeah. So you were telling us just before the show about you signed up for the GitHub account.
So I created Microsoft's GitHub account.
Tell us about that.
So, it wasn't the... I could... Well, let's think how many backstories do I get into.
I was going to say,
the backstories are way
There's
more
a few in
interesting.
here that are interesting.
So let's think. So the highline news right now is 6,500, 7,000 engineers from Microsoft working on GitHub day in, day out. That is their job. That's an amazing transition.
That's today.
That's today. So back then, so at this point is zero. And now there were other GitHub orgs that belonged to Microsoft. I was the owner for CodePlex, which was Microsoft's open source community. And at the time, kind of the rule was, there's a couple of rules, but one of the rules was, which we've slowly been walking back. That's one of the hardest things in a company is to, we've got the process now a lot more streamlined.
Yeah.
But back then, So one of the rules was open source goes to CodePlex. And then, open source goes to CodePlex, basically.
Yeah.
And then there were teams that were like, well, I don't want to go to CodePlex because I need to talk to XYZ community. They don't use CodePlex and blah, blah, blah. I'll never get spotted. And they were right. They need to go where the community is. So people were not wanting to fight the battle about creating the Microsoft org. And so then they would create team accounts. And another problem was they'd also do, well, Microsoft's got a really bad reputation in the open source community. I kind of don't want to affiliate myself with Microsoft because then they'll not take me serious.
So they create a Visual Studio account?
Well, and
Azure
and .NET was a different one. We deliberately created that because that's a separate foundation it belongs to.
That's right.
So you had stealth. You had dark
no,
getters.
I decided to fight the battle because I don't know why.
Because you're Martin. And we had Brian.
Yeah. It helps when you've got air cover, when you've got executive air cover. But So no, it was the right thing to do because we're never going to convince the community that Microsoft is serious about open source if you kept hiding. And it's only by, and the only points of branding within a GitHub org are the URL and the org logo kind of thing. They're the only branding points. And so we needed that to be Microsoft. We need to score brand credits everywhere. So when you go look at PowerShell, when you go look at TypeScript, when you go look at .NET, .NET's different again. It's services. When you look at these different open source projects that Microsoft contribute to, you want to know in your mind that they're coming from Microsoft, and that's the only way we're going to start to change perception. And I think we're beginning to. I hope so. Anyway. Yeah. So I needed to do that. We needed to accrue to the brand. But what I also needed to do was make sure then that CodePlex was. Change the rules so that people didn't have to publish to CodePlex and allow them to go to the Microsoft org. And then you've got to have an interesting question about how do you make it not the Wiki Wild West, and how you actually do it in a controlled way. We've always quite good policies around.
Yeah, I was going to say, that was the beginning of where we needed to really think about like tooling within the company to help manage our GitHub
We
tenant.
have one of the biggest GitHub tenants in the world, and so
It is. But you want to make sure like we get security right.
Yeah.
We ended up building the whole like contributor licensing agreement system.
Yeah, and
Like,
we have
there's a bunch of, like,
systems
things
to help
that we had
manage
to think.
teams, around AD groups and stuff because it's just not in. But anyway, it was so I created the GitHub org and it was cool. And then TypeScript, I think TypeScript was one of the first people
TypeScript,
over
yep.
there. And then, it's just gone great. And then we did a lot of stuff to change the policies inside the company to make it easier for people to contribute to open source. Because again, there were hurdles they had to go through. And part of the team that did this, one of the things we helped people realize was if we're going to take bets on open source technologies, everybody wants to consume open source because, hey, that's free, whatever. But if you're going to take bets on these open source technologies, you need to be able to fix those open source technologies. If you're not contributing to those open source communities, if you're not fixing them, and doing the effort to get a pull request merged, you're going to now be just forking. You're going to slowly diverge away from the open source project if you're not constantly getting your PRs merged. And that means you're going to miss out on the free new features that arrive. And then what was the point? You're now just giving yourself debt. So.
And the other thing I saw that was really interesting during this time is our attorney for developer division, Jason Barnwell.
Awesome guy.
Was like, he's like the coolest guy ever.
I have never heard before.
He's the best
lawyer.
Especially the word corporate attorney.
And then not only
so
that,
key.
Microsoft corporate
So
attorney.
no, our attorneys are special. Okay?
Yeah, they are very special.
They're awesome because again, when you're a company that they're in a company like Microsoft, you hire a lot of lawyers, you get to interview a lot of lawyers, I guess. But he's like, I remember going into. I took a picture of the meeting because it was all very hush-hush secret. I'm going to have the first meeting with the lawyers where I'm going to talk to them about the possibility of maybe introducing Git into Microsoft, the very, very, very first meeting. And it's all a bit hush-hush. I was like, I held it in a building that was away from where we normally are.
Yep.
And I was like, this is good. But when you book a meeting room in Microsoft, you have to add the meeting room into the meeting request. And so I added the meeting room into the meeting request. And I was like, oops, because there on the wall in massive letters next to the meeting room is the shell and tube for the day, along with Git at Microsoft. How do we do it? Question marks and the thing. And
So you got to book a private.
Exactly.
But
So I booked the meeting with the lawyer, and the first thing he said when I came into him, and I was like, hey, so we're thinking about introducing Git into TFS. This is why, explained it all.
Yep.
And he's like, oh. Does that mean I can stop paying for my GitHub account? I was like,
So, like-
my lawyer has a GitHub account?
Well, that's what I meant by
Jason,
shadow GitHub accounts.
So like Jason is an engineer at night. Like he does his legal stuff during the day, and
awesome.
he's like an amazing.
But it's great
kind
as
of
well
guy.
because if we have a license issue, he'll send you a PR to fix your licensing issue. That's what you want from legal.
It is so cool. Like I had lunch with him recently. Like all this stuff he's trying to do, like transform our legal team internally, to get some stuff going. But anyway,
so it was a good transition.
Maybe we'll have legal ops yet.
I get red line documents from my lawyers.
Really?
And so I'd really like a pull request with a proper diff.
They
That
can
would
you can
be
see
awesome.
the history.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, legal ops.
And you can go do blame on it.
So Bloomberg Beta, one of our investors, they actually have their manual in GitHub.
Well, the way to understand lawyers is they're people who program in English. And then because they're words have very specific meanings to them. But anyway, it was good fun. It was a good time.
Yeah.
And we helped transition the whole company into being open source and help our engineers. Like we had engineers who never ever used GitHub before.
Yeah.
Who'd never, and the way of developing software at Microsoft was because we were such a lot of IP in the house, was basically don't go out there and look. We've got to develop everything inside. So it's very introverted opinion, and now it's transitioned amazingly to be much more external.
That also helped us about 2.5 years ago. We started thinking about how we built software.
Yeah.
And we were learning about all the different open source workflows and how they could actually help enterprise software development as well.
Yeah, with inner source is basically
in inner source, right? And so I think one of the best decisions that came out of even all of our transformation here was we used to have engineering systems all over the place internally. And then we also had an engineering system that we made available to our customers too and our developers. And so that 2.5 years ago, we decided hey, why do we have different engineering systems? Like, why can't we just build the best engineering system and have, good portability across the company? All of this was like happening all at the same time. And then finally we made a decision at the senior leadership level.
Yeah, it was sort of such level. But the interesting thing about the reason why we had separate ones was because the Windows team have specific requirements and they want to do something to work on their system. So they've got, we've got source control and work item tracking, issue tracking, and build an RM and all that sort of stuff built into VSTS, which is Visual Studio Team Services, is what Windows now use. But when we had that system, they were like, well, the reason I'm not. Classic corporate architecture, the further somebody is from you in the org chart, the more stupid they are. That's just naturally how it is.
So true.
Yeah. And so, why we're not gonna use their thing because they're idiots, and we need to do our thing, and we're super special. We have very different problems from everybody else.
Right, and they're saying the exact same thing about you.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody else. And so, everybody. But so the trick that we had to do was we had to basically invest in quite a very, very deep extensibility model into VSTS, so that then the Windows team, if they want VSTS to work a certain way, here you go. Here's the API, and it was very much of an open source workflow. You want it, you extend it. If you want to do it, you bring your people, add it. But what we did as well, we opened up the source control. In the old days, everybody's source control repositories were locked down. Nobody had access to everybody else's source control. Now I'm in engineering. I have access to the Windows source control code base, and I have access to Office as well as my own. And if I want to go send a pull request to Notepad to add Unix line ending support finally, which I've tried to do about 5 times, it's surprisingly a hard engineering problem, and I can explain why if you really want to know. But if you want to add, hypothetically speaking, if you wanted to add Unix line ending support into Notepad, I could send that pull request. It wouldn't get approved because it affects like 90 bajillion files. But you could, and that was the other thing, is getting people used to a model of restricted write, permissive read, again, in a source. Because inside Microsoft, when you had access to version control, you had access. You didn't necessarily exercise it.
Right.
And so get into that model. It's been a fascinating transition.
It's been a big transformation for us.
Yeah. I knew we'd won, though. I knew we were winning like the mind share of developers.
You mean as Microsoft?
As inside Microsoft.
Not.
So by we, I mean us open source people infecting Microsoft with our disease. I knew we were winning when Microsoft. We're in a very email-centric company still. We use Teams and Yammer and things like that as well, but we're very, very email-centric still. When you have a baby, you send out the usual, we've had a baby, and a picture comes out, and then everybody sends out the obligatory, oh, lovely baby picture. It's what you do. It's email etiquette.
Yeah.
And so somebody sent out the obligatory, we've had a baby picture, everybody doing well. And then the first reply came back from one of the devs saying, +1 looks good to merge. We've won.
Nice. So it's funny that all the large companies in tech have their own sort of unique dev culture. And some of it leaks out, and some of it looks like what the open source world and what all the small companies look like, and some of it doesn't. And now, compared to Google, which just is its own unique thing, Apple, who doesn't talk to anyone, right? Amazon, which has 50 million unique things, and who knows, and Facebook, which is sort of its own unique sort of monoculture as well. And doesn't really make dev tools, so it doesn't matter. Microsoft is the one that kind of looks closest to what the open source people are doing. And who the fuck saw that coming?
Maybe Martin.
I like to take it was a big team of us. We're winning. So one of the tricks we did there, and again, this was to make sure people use their personal GitHub accounts. So we didn't require somebody to create a Microsoft specific GitHub account. We instead realized that it's a social thing. So we managed to convince our lawyers that maybe what we should use is we've already got guidelines for this produced. It's our blogging guidance. And that was kind of a guidance that we used as a template for the rules around open source. And it's to do it very much as an individual, as a person who works for a company and who, and so when you sign up, when you associate your Active Directory account, your CorpNet account with your GitHub account, It makes sure that you are associating Microsoft as your company, that you're a member of the Microsoft org, so you get the little Microsoft badge. And so people don't feel tricked into accepting a pull request from Microsoft. They're not merging. But it still comes from you as a person.
Have you ever then had a person who's working on an embarrassing side project?
We have had people. So this goes back to how we open the show. You have to still we have to be responsible employers. You have to still protect your people, and there are people who are vulnerable, and you have to be careful. And so you allow people to create pseudonyms, especially if they need to. We have had the odd people who we've had to give guidance to about appropriate profile pictures and things. But mostly it's you're doing this.
So there's HR for open source. Is what you're saying.
So it's interesting, but it's a good problem to have anyway, and it's fascinating. So, and one of the good things about that is because you're under your own name, you build up your profile, and I see
history.
And I see two reactions to this, which is hilarious. One is whenever a new team are thinking about going open source, there's a huge fear from their engineering group. Let me just spend a year refactoring everything so the code looks nice before I make it public. Why is that? I say, it's going to be public. I don't know if I want people to see it. I'm like, this code runs on 1 billion machines. You're telling me it's not good enough?
It's totally the human reaction to that the first time.
But it improves code quality because everyone's now, everyone's doing pull requests. They want it to be good. So it improves code quality, and because everyone's going to look at it, and you can't slip in hacks for a deadline because people get shouty.
You can't hide behind. It's your commit spec.
No, it's fascinating. And then the other thing is obviously people build up their GitHub commit graphs and things, and its history, and so you get that side as well. And so you have to look after your staff because now they're a lot more visible and they can see who's really good. We have a chat ops bot called .NET Bot in the .NET team, and he's a chat bot we have that we get him to do stuff for us, and he's got a nice graphic for him. It can, if we need to grep a bunch of files and make a bunch of changes across a lot of things, do it manually, or should we get .NET Bot to do it? If we're going to do some sort of moving around the code, .NET Bot does it for us. And so you're in Teams, or you're in Gitter, and you send in commands, or in the pull request, you're sending commands to .NET Bot to do things for you. So therefore, .NET Bot has an amazing GitHub commit graph because he's committing to one of the biggest open source projects on the internet, every day, completely dark green. And so, so he gets emails from recruiters 3 a week. The funniest thing is, I'm actually almost convinced a robot's getting recruitment emails from another robot at the the robots are giving robots jobs.
Oh my god,
it's the end of the world.
It's all going to be Well, I have a question. So we heard from another guest about how Windows itself started using Git.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was, that nearly killed me, if I'm honest.
Yes.
Were you responsible for the 5 stages of Git posters?
Yeah, I wasn't actually. That was genius.
That was genius.
Yeah, that was good.
I was so glad.
No, I was responsible in the people learning the 5 stages of Git, potentially.
The anger one?
Yeah. No, we came in and sat down with the Windows team, and we were like, hey, we need to rationalize our engineering systems. What's the deal? And so Windows is a big code base that's been built up over a lot of years. It's a big monolithic code base that's all in one hunk of stuff.
That's the definition of
a... But it's big,
It's beyond any size.
It was so big. We had a
mammoth model.
We had our own version control system that we'd written to handle the load of Windows, and it wasn't big enough to support them, so they had 26 instances of those that they would shard the code across. It was enormous. And then so we came in and I was like, well, Git's not going to work for that. Git works for really small, this is stupid. Git works for small modules. You need to break up the code. But we don't want to break up the code. You're an idiot going to Git. Why would you do that? And I'm like, no, we really want to use Git. Git's really important. It'll help us recruit. It'll help us use standard tools. It's important. So I'm like, huh. And then, so you come down the discussion, you think, well, let's break Windows up into lots of little bits.
Lots of components,
Let's just componentize Windows.
I feel like this is how microservices happened. It was when you thought about the world in SVN ways, monoliths made sense. But now, each team, we want to have our own repo. So, the idea that Git also did the same thing to Windows
Yes. Well, it didn't in the end.
It didn't.
Oh, okay.
We'll come to that. It
That's
tried.
one of the learnings we did.
No, it's definitely Git does lead you to more component-based architectures, which is actually better architecture. So it's interesting. That's probably why the teams have been successful. But so move Windows to a component-based model, and then we learned it. It was insane, and it wasn't going to work, and it was horrible. And we tried.
It took us a year to figure that out too.
Because we have the best engineers. You know, we have lots of engineers. We can solve.
Like,
this
we're going
problem.
to solve this.
Turns out we can't. So what we did instead was wrote. But what we can do is we've got a lot of computer scientists. So we ended up writing a file system, a virtual file system, a GVFS, Git Virtual File System, which is open source. It's a Microsoft.com. GitHub.com, whack Microsoft, whack GVFS. And it's, a virtual file system driver that knows about Git repositories and has a deep understanding in how Git repositories work. And so when you clone the Git repo, it only pulls down the portions of the Git repo you need to be able to do various operations. And then in the background, it hydrates, it has lots of pointers, and then it hydrates the real files, and it can pull them down rather than using the Git protocols to pull them down from one master server. It pulls down binaries from, proxy servers, from images that are nearby, and like virtualize a bunch of this stuff. And and it's amazing to me that it works. I was like, when the guys proposed this, a guy called Joe Duffy, who's a very clever guy from the Dory team, I don't think he works for him, but he's an incredibly clever guy. I remember he first proposed it in this architecture meeting. I'm like, Joe, you're insane. That's never going to work.
It's never going to work.
Because there's times when, because again, being the open source guy, I find sometimes like our audacity is annoying me at times. I'm like, that's just, why would you do that? That's crazy. Nobody would do that. That's insane. TypeScript. I thought TypeScript was going to fail. I was like, Anders comes to me with like TypeScript, and we're going to open source this thing. I'm like, you're going to do thing on JavaScript? Dude, nobody's going to do that. Everybody, what's wrong with JavaScript? It's fine. And then what do I know? Anyway, so... but I didn't think this was going to work either. Yeah. And turns out I was wrong.
Two weekends ago, we
moved Windows over.
Yeah. All in one Git repo.
Yeah. And we're using GVFS.
So,
and that gives them the performance that they need. And they're still learning, Everybody has that moment where you think you've lost your code in your Git repo.
Yeah.
And there's operations, because it's such a different form of version control, there's some operations which work really well and are a lot faster than they were, but then there are other operations which are a lot slower than they were because it's got to analyze the whole tree to get the answer. So anyway, yeah.
And Syed has been doing a bunch of different talks about like, hey, on this journey.
Yeah, a Git merge. There's some Git merge is the big committer view.
Yeah.
And so Syed's got those views.
We got a panel tomorrow.
So
by the time you hear this, it'll be a good recording for you.
Yeah. So no, it's an interesting story, and then it's all open source, and we're trying to. We're actually working with different people, see if we can get GVFS. Actually bundled with different Git distributions as well, so other people can take advantage of it.
The Tower guys, the Atlassian team,
so
everyone's
it's all good. But
really
it's don't use it if you can possibly avoid it. Like, go component based, go for small, discrete, bits of code, and your code will be better code. But we do have an option.
Yeah. Well, this was a fascinating journey to hear, everything from the first account to Windows moving to Git. Thank you so much for coming by today.
Thank you for having
me. Yeah, this was awesome. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to this episode of To Be Continuous, brought to you by Heavybit and hosted by me, Paul Bigger of Circle CI, and Edith Harbaugh of Launch Darkly.
To learn more about Heavybit, visit heavybit.com. While you're there, check out their library, home to great educational talks from other developer company founders and industry leaders.